This is Martin Giles of the Guildford Dragon News, and I'm with Pat Oven, the leader of the Guildford Greenbelt Group at Guildford Borough Council. And in the series of interviews I'm doing, hopefully with all the leaders of the political parties at GBC. Councillor Oven, thank you for giving your time to be interviewed again by the Guildford Dragon.
Pleasure, Martin.
And we'll crack on. So, you're the leader of the Guildford Greenbelt Group, but is protection of the Greenbelt now a lost cause?
Well, I'd have to say I hope not. But obviously recent developments would give even the greatest optimist cause for alarm. I'm concerned that this concept of grey belt, which to me seems really frankly nonsense.
What do you think the grey belt is?
Well, grey belt is simply an invention of this government to define not very pretty green belt, but that's not the purpose of the green belt. It's not areas of outstanding natural beauty or natural landscapes.
No.
The purpose of the green belt is to stop settlements encroaching on each other, and it doesn't have to be pretty, but it's the whole idea is to ensure separation.
And they've described it as their classic example is a disused garage. Well, I'm not aware of too many disused garages in Guildford. And in any case, didn't we used to call that a brownfield site?
Well, I think there's a difference between brownfield sites and green belt. A brownfield site is I would regard as a previously developed site in an urban environment.
But a disused garage would be in an urban environment.
Yeah, in an urban environment. See, there was all. What they don't seem to be making clear is there was always power to build in the green belt, even under the previous national planning policy framework. And previously developed land was one of the exceptions. So you could always redevelop an existing building. There may be constraints as regards how big you could make it, because you look at the way it seems to work is you look at the size it was when first built, or the size in 1947 when the first Town and Country Planning Act was passed, and you see how much increase there's going to be. So it's almost as though this is some brilliant new concept, when really all they're talking about is housing or development that was there already and which could always be redeveloped.
I've also heard them say that if there isn't sufficient grey belt, then of course they will have to look at green belt. Is that your understanding?
That is my understanding, and obviously, going back to the start of your question, my concern is that having inset villages, they'll now look to inset further villages. But the problem with the insetting of the villages is that the law of unintended consequences has very clearly come into play. It was obvious to me when villages like Send were inset that we wouldn't simply get the development that was planned, because once you basically had a 180-degree shift. You shifted from a presumption against development, apart from in very special circumstances, to a presumption in favour of sustainable development. Well, I'll say that's pretty much a 180-degree shift. And what happened in villages like Send and the Horsleys is that there's lots of houses on large plots, and people were simply looking at those plots, buying them up, putting in planning applications. I mean, Send has had, I calculated something like 50 or 60 windfall sites or windfall developments already, and the whole borough was expected to have 50 windfall sites a year. 100. And they've got to take into account all of these extra houses, because they are all going towards meeting the housing target. And when I raised with the head of planning just after my election, was any check being made and records kept, she looked to her colleagues and as though to look for reinforcement, and it was clear nobody was keeping a check. But I'm going to make sure that checks are kept of how many there are, and I'll be counting the ones in my own village. I've been doing gradually anyway, but we're changing out of all recognition, and there's no infrastructure being put in.
Right, but if we look at it from the government's point of view, their aim is to achieve economic growth. The southeast region is, the most economically successful and prosperous, and politically they've got not much to lose in Surrey, because
they haven't, because they're not going to get any votes. And I think that's the problem, because there should be development in London, and yet London, as far as I'm aware, has had its targets not just kept stable but reduced. Now, I don't know if this is a sop to Mr. Khan, but it's all very well saying to counties like Surrey, Kent and Hertfordshire, you're going to have to build more and more, but they're highly developed counties already. I mean, Woking and Guildford are effectively going to merge, and Guildford and Aldershot are going to merge.
But, so that all sounds pretty depressing from your party's point of view, I guess. And so I'll ask the question again. Do you think it's a lost cause, the Green Belt?
I don't think it's a lost cause, but as I say, it's the labour of Sisyphus. We're pushing a heavy stone uphill, and as you get to the top of the hill, you simply have to start again at the bottom. There's not a lot of sympathy with us on the council. I find myself frequently in a minority of one. I'm not some out and out NIMBY who opposes all development. I actually vote for quite a lot of the development, but I want it to be done properly. And my area, which was already slated for 40% of the development with 18% of the population, even before we got all the windfall sites, I think certainly the northeast of the borough has had more than its share. I don't think we can take any more. If there are going to be further big areas of development, they've got to bring into play some of the sites that were initially considered, for example, around Normandy, because they use before that, they've got to make sure that every piece of land in the centre of Guildford that can be developed is developed. I mean, it might surprise you that there's a Shaping Guildford's Future group. I'm a member of that. Now, I'm the only member of the planning committee that's on that group. And that strikes me as rather bizarre, because it seems to me that Shaping Guildford's Future and planning are inextricably bound together.
But you said there that you find yourself in a minority of one. I guess that you mean on the planning committee.
On the planning committee, yes. Yeah.
And but why do you think then that the administration generally, and perhaps some of the other opposition parties, actually accept the government's position on this?
I'm not sure if they actually accept the government's position, but I think certainly the Liberal Democrats do not. I don't see any independence of mind in the Liberal Democrat group. They all seem to vote en masse. I mean, after the vote we had 10 days ago, 2 weeks, just coming up to 2 weeks, in relation to the 70 house site at Wisley Airfield, just off Wisley Airfield. We lost that.
This is extra to the obviously the big.
No, it's part of the development.
Oh, it's part of it, yes, but it's on the side of it.
It's on the side of it, but the development is 2,000 houses. It's 1,430, I think, at the main site on the airfield itself. Another 200. Sorry, 1,730.
Yeah, 700.
Another 200 at Bridge End Farm, and then this site at Little Uptons, known as the Hallam Land site, is 70. And a Liberal Democrat came up to me after and said, well, I thought, I agreed with what you said, but I didn't feel you put forward any planning reasons to turn it down. And I said, well, I quoted the council's own experts saying that, and two and three experts stating that this is going to clearly harm the conservation area, which is in itself, it's often a question of getting a balance. You see, you can say, well, there's going to be harm, but that harm is outweighed by the public good. And where you strike the balance is really, I mean, I speak as an ex-lawyer, you can argue on both sides, and you can make a logical argument on both sides. It's just a question of whether the balance shifts one side of the line or the other.
Yeah, it is quite a subjective judgment.
It is, yes.
Okay. Now, you did mention something about the performance of the current administration there, and it's been 18 months now since the Borough Council election in 2023.
Yeah, May.
You've had plenty of time now to analyse that result. What are your conclusions?
You mean from the point of view of my party, or from the
no,
governance?
Just generally. You're in the council now for the first time as a councillor, so you've had a close-up look. What's your assessment?
I was very concerned at the start that there was, as I say, Liberal Democrats I wasn't particularly impressed by initially. I think they've improved considerably. I think Julia's performance has improved, although I still believe that...
That's the council leader.
Yeah, Julia McShane, the council leader. But I still feel that openness is something that they are keen on when it's something that they can boast about, but perhaps less keen on when it's something that's not going so well. I think they've done well in relation to the financial situation, although it does, I think, beg the question whether the financial situation was quite as bad as we were told, because if it really was that dire, I really don't understand how we could have turned it round in 12 months, because we're now, it seems, back on track. We're not completely out of the woods, but there's no question, it seems, of a Section 114, effectively declaration of bankruptcy in the near future. And
So don't you ever think that was a real threat?
We were told it was a real threat, but I think the council always had sufficient assets to be able to stave it off. But I think it has helped the change of leadership in the financial side. I think that Richard Bates has been a breath of fresh air. He's been extremely hard working when the team he's brought in. I was part of the group to try and to ensure financial recovery. Somewhat disappointingly, not all the opposition parties were prepared to take part in that. I think I'm on record as saying I felt that this is something that we needed effectively to have a national government, if there's such a thing in local government. We needed a united front, because the main thing was to ensure that the council kept going rather than making party political points. Fortunately, members who were invited to join from the Conservatives and Arthur GV are now back on board, but that is now a thing of the past. That group has been wound up because effectively we're out of the woods, at least for the foreseeable future.
Okay, so you mentioned a few things there in your assessment. Let's look at, first of all, openness. Isn't it the fact that all politicians keep to themselves what they don't want to discuss?
I think that's human nature, isn't it? I mean, it's all well that the Nolan principles are. I think openness of the Nolan principles is probably the most important of all, because if you're open, then all the other things become apparent as well. It's apparent whether you're being objective. It's. I think that is the absolute key. I mean, for example, very recently, great play was made at the last council meeting, of how we're on track in relation to this climate emergency. Although I did make the point at that meeting that. There was I can't remember exactly how, it's 100 and something points, and I think we'd made a start on something like 30 odd of them, which rather suggests that the other 90 odd are probably still either not started or not even contemplated started yet.
Well, I mean, you have sight of what's on pink papers, those that are marked confidential. Obviously, you can't disclose what's on them, but do you think they are properly classified? Because, I mean, I do have some experience here as a previous civil servant in the military, and I must admit I witnessed quite a lot of over-classification, because it's a simple thing to do. You want to protect certain bits of information, so you just classify the whole paper.
I think there is truth in that. I think there's a difference between sensitivity, your own political sensitivity, and true sensitivity. I think that some stuff is that the natural reaction is to hold it back. That's why I was instrumental in calling in the decision in relation to the sale of the ransom strip that was going to facilitate the Blackwell Farm development. I saw absolutely no reason at all why that needed to be dealt with in the way it was. I spent days on end ploughing through the council's constitution, finding point after point that I thought that they'd fallen short on. We didn't actually get it changed, but I think that it was very important. See, my party, it's not solely concerned with the Greenbelt. The part of the raison d'etre of the Guildford Greenbelt group was to ensure that local politics was open and that politicians were held to account. And that hadn't seemed to happen. And it's nothing to do with just the Liberal Democrats. I don't think the previous. I don't think the. No. I certainly don't think the previous when the Conservatives were in charge, they were in any way open. They have, as it were, attacked the Lib Dems and the Lib Dems and Arthur GV as though everything only went wrong from the point where they came in. I really don't think it's as black and white and simple as that. Things were going wrong.
But it's not even just Guildford Borough Council, is it? I mean, if you read other news stories from around the country, local authorities all over the country have a similar pattern of behaviour. I think
that's the nature. They don't want to be criticised, and if things aren't out in the open, then you're less. But of course, if things do start to leak out, then you get more criticism because you're asked, well, why couldn't you just come up with this and be straight about it?
And often people are criticised more for the cover up than they are for the
absolutely yes.
Deed. Okay. But so in sum then, marks out of 10 for openness of the current administration?
I would say no more than 6.
Okay. And do you think that's their caution, or do you think it's people like the council officers?
I think there is also caution amongst council officers. Certain officers, I think, have a default position of not really wishing to give any more information than they absolutely have to. Although I think that is changing. I think Pedro Robel and also Tom before him were trying to change that But of course, it's something that's built into people over generations. You don't get rid of it overnight. Absolutely, it's a culture that's developed over generations.
Okay, and we all know that organisational culture change is one of the most challenging of all, if not the most challenging. Okay, so in your experience, are councillors actually familiar with the Nolan principles and their requirement to comply with them?
Well, I would hope so.
Well, I'm
an ex-civil servant, so I had some knowledge of them from being a prosecutor.
I asked this question of the leader of the Labour group, and he said to me that he wouldn't be able to list them, and
I think I could.
Right, and he didn't think most. Well, I don't know if he said most councillors, but many councillors couldn't.
I mean, they are pretty much common sense. They are.
Yeah, you wouldn't think you would need to know the list.
Lord Nolan, in his report, obviously thought that what may be principles of common sense and ought to be self-evident to everybody ought to actually be spelt out. I mean, selflessness, objectivity, integrity. They're all fairly straightforward concepts that should be obvious to any councillor or any public servant, whether a local government officer or a civil servant.
But you do sign up to comply with them. I think actually physically sign up to comply.
Yeah, well, if you're doing that, you should be looking them up.
Yeah, exactly. And when we take promises or oaths or of loyalty or whatever it is, it's a serious thing. People expect you to.
Yeah. Well, of course, you sign your declaration at the start of you as you become a councillor, but that doesn't, from memory, it doesn't actually spell out the Nolan principles. It's really looking about what your interests are, financial interests.
Does it even mention them? Saying
I don't believe it did actually. Okay. I might be wrong, but I can't remember all them being mentioned. I'll have to check. I mean, it's a while ago.
So let's go back to the finances then. What shape are they in generally now, do you think? You've said that you think that we've avoided the risk of declaring ourselves bankrupt, basically.
Yeah, obviously, I think when we say finance, we've got to split the situation between the general account and the housing revenue
I'm talking about the general account.
Yeah, the general account, I think, is secure at the present time. I say I've been having regular, or up until about 2 months ago, we're having regular meetings as part of the financial recovery group, and we were being spoken to very, very frankly, very honestly. When we could see progression being made, and I think we are secure, not indefinitely, but for the immediate future. I still have grave concerns about the wayside urban village.
Right. Is that the biggest risk?
I think it is the biggest risk, and if anything could sink the council, not in the immediate future, it might be 2 or 3 years down the line, but what concerns me about the wayside urban village is that it was only ever really intended to break even, which is setting the bar very low. And you've only got to get a few increases. Materials, the price of building materials has shot up since the pandemic, and it's the main source of social housing in Guildford. And if it doesn't work,
can you remind me how many social houses are we going to get?
I don't know. But it is 40% of whatever the total is. I think it's 1,500, isn't it? So it's 40%. But the trouble is with these things, you're offered 40%, and then as you start building, suddenly the developer comes back and says, well, I'm afraid I can't make a profit.
Well, we've seen that as a pattern.
Absolutely. You see, the only way you can guarantee 40% social is like when they used to build council houses. The council owned the land, and the councils would say to a developer, you will build us X number of council houses. They're all a public-private partnership now. Yeah. And of course, the developer is saying, well, I've done the maths and I can't deliver it, can't do it.
Okay, but what are Guildford, the existing Guildford residents getting from that project and the other expensive project, which is Ash Bridge?
Well, Ash Bridge has been talked about, I think, since the end of the 19th century.
Well, yes, but I mean, but that's not when the funding are for it.
No, I mean, I don't know enough about. Again, Guildford seems to be paying an inordinate amount towards the funding of that, which I would have thought, in my naive simplicity, was effectively a county council highways project. This predates my time in the council, but it's from what I've seen of it that the price just keeps going up and going up exponentially. The Ash residents who won't be queuing at the crossing will probably be getting something, but I don't think that Guildford as a whole is gaining very
I mean,
much from it.
I know that some people wanted it before the extra housing, but it does seem that it was the extra housing that actually brought it to a head.
Yes, well, it's always it's the infrastructure that should be put in first, but of course somebody has to pay for the infrastructure.
Exactly. But
And
my question is, what are Guildford residents getting from? So it does mean that they won't be delayed at the railway anymore. But I mean, it's, you know, I used to travel along that road regularly. It wasn't a big handicap.
No,
and there were
unless
routes.
you got caught just as the trains were coming, two trains were coming at once.
Yeah, exactly. But you have more alternative routes too. So.
I'm not ideally positioned, but bearing in mind I'm a representative for the northeast of the borough, and this is the southwest, and I don't really go into Ash very often.
No, but doesn't it seem that Guildford residents are paying for these projects through the financing that the council's having to do? But actually, most of the people that are going to benefit are the people that are moving into the borough.
Yeah, or people in Aldershot, for that, for example.
Okay.
Yes. Well, this is the problem. I mean, a lot of these developments are not really going to benefit people who are living in Guildford at the moment. You know, they talk about affordable housing, but of course, all affordable housing means is a £500,000 house becomes a £400,000 house. I mean, it's, as I said to an inspector once, it's the affordability of the judge who said that, you know, in his tongue in his cheek, the law, like the Ritz Hotel, is open to all. I mean, you know, a £400,000 house to somebody earning £30,000 a year is equally unaffordable.
Exactly. But we do need. I mean, everyone seems to agree we need social housing.
We do.
And there are 2,000 on the list, I think, roughly at the moment.
Yeah. And the problem, of course, is that Guildford social housing is in a terrible mess. I mean, figures that struck me when we had the report about 6 months ago now. The average turnaround for a council property in Guildford between tenant A leaving and tenant B moving in was something like 50 weeks. The average turnaround over the country as a whole is 3 weeks. And of course, that indicates two things. Firstly, that those houses must have been very neglected because they need a lot of work doing before they can be re-let. And also, of course, you're not in the time that house is being refurbished, you're gaining no income.
Yeah. Okay, well, time's against us. So there's a couple of things I want to cover. The HRA, the investigations into the overspend on a contract and of 18 million, it said, and possible fraud still drag on. Now you're a former criminal barrister. Would you have conducted them differently?
Well, I'm not an investigator, although I did deal with frauds, and effectively I became an investigator on one large fraud I dealt with. One thing struck me as very strange about this, that people actually wanted to be interviewed. Now that's very unusual for people who are guilty. People who are guilty of things usually want to avoid being spoken to by the police or any investigators.
I mean, to be fair, some of them have declined to be interviewed since.
Yeah, but there were people who were coming forward, and they were coming forward because they were saying we effectively had been given, if not in express permission, implicit permission to do additional work. But the problem was there were no effectively clerks of work, supervisors at Guildford Council at that time, and the developers were marking their own homework. They were passing stuff which may or may not have been adequate. I'm very concerned about the time it's taking, and expectations are clearly being limited. I had a meeting with Pedro Robel a couple of months ago, and it is clear that we're looking at potentially years before that police investigation is finalised. There's also another there's their own investigation.
Years, did you say? Years,
potentially. Whether that's because it's being put on a slow track on the back burner, I really don't know. But I was astonished that there's no sign of anything pending as regards a resolution to this. And of course, they've got their own investigation as well, conducted with Reigate and Banstead, and they've instructed solicitors to conduct an investigation.
Yes, my understanding is the Reigate and Banstead involvement has now ended.
Oh, yeah, you perhaps know more than I do.
It's been handed over to these independent.
Oh, right.
Okay,
right.
But
that's
what I've been told.
Right. Okay, I wasn't aware of that.
No, I wasn't until quite recently. But okay, I mean,
we've certainly had no update on this. In recent months.
As I say, you're a former criminal barrister. Can you see? I mean, I've been told that two of those that were suspended, the two permanent officers that were suspended, have now been paid off. Are you able to confirm that?
I can't confirm it, no. All I can
You
say
can't- you don't know.
we know there was a settlement. Whether that settlement involved being paid off, I'm assuming settlement does mean being paid off. But the way we were told about that, for example, I think we were notified on a Friday evening, and then there was a press release on the Monday morning. It was.
No, but they're the senior directors. That was what the press release was about, wasn't it?
the two senior directors who had been
Yes,
suspended.
I'm talking about
Yeah.
the more junior ones.
Oh, sorry, no, I'm not. I don't know anything about the more
Don't know
junior
anything about
ones.
this,
No,
okay.
no.
But we know that the senior directors
They're-
have a settlement. Yeah.
They've reached agreement with them.
Okay.
Yes, I assume that means some sort of financial settlement.
Okay. Well, lastly, Joss Bigmore in his interview indicated that in future there might be a closer alliance between R4GV and GGG, is the Guildford Greenbelt Group. Is that your view?
Well, it's interesting Joss says that, because Joss and I have never actually had a formal meeting since I joined the council.
Right.
I mean, we've chatted informally at meetings, but we've never actually sat down and discussed anything. So it's certainly not on the cards in the immediate future. I mean,
you do
our
compete-
positions are closely aligned.
Yes.
I don't always vote. We don't always vote
No.
together, and then I have had people from the for Alpha GV looking round in apparent horror when we reach decisions, but we're independent.
Yeah.
We'll make our own view
Well,
on things.
R4GV don't always vote
No,
the same way.
no.
No.
You know, we'll reach our own, and sometimes we don't. There's no whipping within mine. There's only three of us, and I've sometimes voted a different way to my colleagues.
Yeah.
You know, we take an independent view.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, on something that was absolutely vital, I think we would obviously have a consensus. But a lot of these matters are not really that important.
Do you think the National Party groups at the council, do you think they do exercise whipping?
Well, I think so, and I was very concerned that I don't think you were there, but the last council meeting, a motion was brought by the Liberal Democrats effectively to condemn the removal of the winter fuel allowance, and I thought, why are we doing this? And at the time, I should have said more, but I there was a counter motion proposed by James Walsh on behalf of the Labour Party, which I voted with, much to I think the Labour Party's surprise. But I said, well, effectively, there was nothing in your motion I could disagree with, really, because effectively the guts have been pulled out of the Liberal Democrat motion. But I did rather wonder whether this Liberal Democrat motion had been something that Liberal Democrat HQ had passed around to all Liberal Democrat councils in the country and said, put this on your agenda. I mean, what's the point of it? We can't do anything about it. I mean, from my point of view, I don't agree with the way that it's being done. And I said to James, if you want to change this, why don't you propose to your people in the Labour Party that instead of simply having a cliff edge where everybody drops off unless they're on benefit. I mean, I said I'd be perfectly happy if they said anybody who's paying tax at higher rate is not given the allowance, and everybody else is given it, but they're taxed on it.
Yeah.
And somebody like me who pays tax at just below the higher rate, I'll pay more. I'm happy with that if it means people can keep their winter fuel allowance. I mean, that seems to me a simpler and fairer solution.
Your logic then was that wasn't a matter for the local authority.
It's not really, is it?
Okay.
I mean, we can't. It's just virtue signalling.
Okay.
We can't do anything about it. And I thought it was wrong that we were being asked to consider it.
Okay, well, Councillor Pat Oven, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Martin.